some important things that we find to be most critical when we're all said and done about our technical case, our business case, our moral case, and a just case. When we think about a transportation project, oftentimes we lean into that idea of transportation. And what I want to do is really shift our thinking a little bit and really emphasize that transportation is a tool, and transportation has always been a tool. And what we're doing here is leveraging this transportation tool for the purposes of community building. And that becomes really most critical for us when it's all said and done. One of the things also that I think is important to keep in mind as we go through this presentation and those in the future, and we consider this, um, want to put a little finer point on the fact that the Minnesota Department of Transportation has already embarked in a process to plan improvements, changes, et cetera, to the most diverse corridor in the state of Minnesota. The I-94, interstate connects obviously St. Paul and Minneapolis, and the area that we're talking about is roughly 7.5 miles. The idea of rethinking I-94 launched in 2016, and its first phase went through 2018. And it followed a formal apology by the Minnesota Department of Transportation, then Commissioner Charlie Zelle, and the City of St. Paul Mayor Chris Coleman. And it provided for an opportunity not only to have the harm acknowledged, but allowed the community to kind of pivot a bit. And so this is the corridor, and we know the star is where the location of where we imagine an African American cultural enterprise district, but more specifically a land bridge that connects both sides of the freeway. The effort to reconnect Rondo and the Rondo community is separate than the process that MnDOT is engaging in, though it does run parallel and at some point will intersect. Some of you already know that MnDOT has been in this process to review alternatives, but um, um, before it had identified alternatives, it really explored a wide range of things. Today, we know that the recommendation was to eliminate expansion and to eliminate at grade, but all other alternatives work successfully or have the potential of supporting our effort as well. I think it's also important that we recognize that we've spent the last 4 or 5 years truly engaging community deeply. Elders, descendants, residents of St. Paul, jurisdictional organizations or entities, nonprofit leaders, state representatives, governor's office, city and county representatives, as well as those that are elected officials at the city level as well as the state level, including the mayor's office. But I also want to mention that we've got a lot of great support from our senators at the U.S. Senate, as well as our congressional leaders. So it's been quite a journey to get to this point. And with that said, we're grounded, though, in community. This is a community-led project that leverages the systems, processes, tools, and resources along with our relationships, as I've just previously mentioned, to reach better outcomes for community overall. When we think about our project, we always want to connect the past because we understand the harm that was caused. We want to celebrate the current because it's a very diverse community today, but we really want to set conditions into the future. And so one key question for us is how do you, or how do we, or how does Minnesota restore a community so devastated by a freeway system? For us, restorative development really focuses in on rebuilding and revitalizing communities that have suffered systemic harm, ensuring long-term sustainability, I would say resilience as well as equity. 700 homes were taken, 300 businesses taken. The loss in Rondo has been quantified by some of our other studies. And if we imagine the 700 homes that have been taken, the current value, if they were still there in their location, would be $250 million of unrealized real estate value or equity. So restorative development aims to rebuild that wealth through community-led investment, infrastructure, and economic opportunity. So let's take a look at who is Reconnect Rondo. We're a nonprofit organization leading a restorative movement. Our approach to transportation planning and project development is fundamentally different than the way cities, MPOs, counties, and DOTs approach the work. At its core, it is a commitment to community-centered leadership and ownership, empowering residents to challenge conventional infrastructure and urban development practices while navigating complex policies and compliance landscapes. The organization champions innovative approaches, champions community-first solutions that prioritize equity, justice, and economic self-determination and empowerment. Reconnect Rondo is making a compelling technical, business, moral, and just case for restoring the Rondo neighborhood. And if we think about some 950 communities across the country, we are trying to establish the model that can be taken and applied in other communities that have been similarly impacted. Again, through restorative development. At the heart of this effort is a network of interconnected technical studies, each reinforcing the necessity for intentional community-led efforts. So, to revitalize the community is the mission. To use the leveraging of transportation policy or tools like a land bridge to reignite an African American cultural enterprise district. Certainly, land bridges are not unique. They're not new. They're all over the country. In fact, I just returned back from Seattle on a trip, which was one of the first trips we took back in 2016 to see what was going on, as well as really Clyde Warren Bridge in Dallas, Texas, and other locations and areas across the country. The land bridge, is an investment in people. This is an investment in community. This is an investment in possibility. This is also an investment that brings a return on investment. Oftentimes we think about community as a cost. And for us, we'd like to always reframe that. This is really about an investment, not only in those who have lost, but those who are currently residing in St. Paul and the region. And yes, I would argue in Minnesota. So just imagine a blank canvas. We see a blank canvas and we see an opportunity to really put some structural things in place, some processes in place and ways of leveraging tool for a big idea. And that's to create an African American cultural enterprise district. What might we imagine on this district? History and culture, retail and marketplace, housing, play space, botanical garden, performance space. Again, the ideas are endless. And I had mentioned earlier, possibility thinking. But it's never an easy proposition when it's all said and done, because costs are always something that's important. But as I mentioned before, we're making a technical case. And this is really some of the result of our early feasibility study. It really is building a case to say this is feasible. And what we had really, if we imagine, were 5 goals when we set out on this feasibility study: neighborhood connections, housing affordability, equitable development, public health and green space, and really community leadership. If we can imagine the process of this investment opportunity, we're talking about building a structure, the development on top of that structure, and ultimately programming that really allows for the resources generated to cycle back into the neighborhood. The potential of 576 housing units, 1,000 new residents, job creation to the tune of 1,800 jobs. That's just the project development and the structure. A marketplace, square footage for nonprofit and institutional space, and revenue back to the city itself. As mentioned, we're making a technical case, a business case, a moral case, and a just case. And I've already mentioned that we've really we've gotten to a point of really being able to talk about this project in a very multidimensional way. Let me just really emphasize 2 studies in particular, and then we'll get to the presentation around the neighborhood area plan. restorative development visioning, and our anti-displacement and community investment strategies. There are a whole host of types of displacement that happens in communities. Certainly gentrification, displacement that is more direct, displacement that is really indirect, and cultural displacement itself. And it's really important for us to recognize that when the Central Light Rail Corridor project was going along University Avenue, there weren't these kinds of considerations and protections for the community. Just imagine that we have to the west development of Alliance Field, and to the east of the Rondo area, we've got what's going on at the Capitol around the Sears site as well. And the community of Rondo is sandwiched between. And so, how do we ensure that people are not taxed out? How do we ensure that people and the history and the culture is not displaced by new or residents coming in, forgetting about the really fundamental things that were important about Rondo prior? Let's really define, if I can, for you, restorative development. It is a systems-based approach to development. Essentially, we have indicators that say, in fact, 18 indicators that suggest that Rondo is net negative. Whether we're talking about educational security, health and food access, shelter, economics, energy, proximity to pollution. And so our approach fundamentally is to have an umbrella understanding of not only what restorative development is, but also what is equity. And for us, it is the building of a resilient and sustainable community ecosystem, which really requires us to take a very holistic view of how we respond to the question, how do you restore communities? It is pretty layered. It is an audacious proposition. But as I mentioned, it is a systems approach to development that is inclusive, where the where environmental, social, and economic performance happens. I've been in the Twin Cities 45 years, as I've mentioned before, and I've seen no scalable change for African Americans. And so with that being an aim, everything that we do really is very much integrated. Let me just touch on the anti-displacement, and I won't spend a lot of time here because we do have an event scheduled for August 13th that'll dive a little bit deeper into it. But I do want to indicate that the purpose of our study, our anti-displacement community investment study, is to ensure that we have guardrails that protect the community and that leverage opportunity for investment and prosperity moving forward. So 4 basic goals: develop an anti-displacement toolkit, establish the right to stay, the right to return in the community, establish Rondo as a community investment vehicle, or at least the project as a community investment vehicle using a trust model, and also really make sure that the funds that are generated go back into community itself. I also want to just put a thought in mind because we rarely think about it in this way: the community as the developer. We know how projects happen, like the Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority or the Ballpark Authority, etc. These things really brought about US Bank Stadium and Target Field. Instead of using a 3P model, which is what is applied to those 2 projects and others, we are putting forward a 4P model: public, private, philanthropic, and people. We believe fundamentally those 4 legs of a stool are critical to moving community forward. And I really want to emphasize the importance of how community leadership ties into an ability for the people who are in the community to participate in investing in that and gaining return. More to come in our August 13th session. Well, finally, we've reached a particular point where we're going to get into what I think you've all wanted to really hear about. And we've got a couple of just extraordinary people who have been working with us for a long period of time. I would say since 2022. They've led efforts around our neighborhood area plan and worked with a number of our consulting partners to bring about what is being presented here today. So I'm going to turn it over now to um, Craig Vaughn and Lance Barnard to move forward in helping you all better understand exactly the work and where Reconnect Rondo is at this particular point.
Thank you, Keith. And I'll help just transition us just a bit. If you can stop screen sharing and then we can allow Craig or Lance, whoever will be doing that, to screen share. I don't know if there's a request necessity. Otherwise, if it just allows you to do it, feel free to do that. In the meantime, I'd love to just talk about TC2 and their work. They've had extensive experience in transportation and community planning, particularly around community engagement and gathering people together around urban planning, urban design, development, traffic and parking analysis, uh, safety analysis, project management, and really honing in on the belief that moving people with transportation is best achieved through collaboration, hence their name, amongst communities and organizations to create sustainable solutions that meet their needs today while also providing a future for our next generations. And so Craig is the president and co-founder since 2021. And after 23 years of working in transportation, he has over 25 years of experience in engineering and planning and community engagement, and his ability to really connect with a diverse range of communities and explain complex technical material, which you'll hear today in plain language, has helped him really deliver this multimodal transportation infrastructure across the Midwest. And so Craig hails all the way from St. Paul, Minnesota, the Rondo neighborhood, where he's working to reconnect the community through this restorative, innovative transportation project, one that will bring an opportunity for wealth building again. Lance Bernard, who is also with us today from TC2, is the Director of Planning, who has worked over 20 years leading a variety of planning projects on our aspects, such as including comprehensive land use plans, neighborhood studies, public health initiatives, and again, expanded multimodal planning, as well as Craig. And so we're excited to have them and their approach on building trust and genuine listening to community needs, aspirations, and desires, and overall the collaboration of TC2 and Reconnect Rondo in crafting the Rondo Restorative Neighborhood Plan. So thank you for attending today again. I put the link if you're interested in registering for our upcoming webinar on anti-displacement, August 13, in the chat. And at this time, I'll allow for Craig and Lance to take over. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Lance will be driving the slides here for us, and we're hopeful to give you all an overview of the Restorative Neighborhood Area Plan here over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. And as Keith opened up with, hopefully provide an opportunity for robust discussion and conversation, question and answer period thereafter. And feel free to put anything in the chat too, if you'd like, regarding any questions that maybe they strike you in the moment as we're presenting or going through the slides here for the most part. One thing I want to underscore and emphasize, and this will be stated in our slides upcoming, that this was not solely a TC2 effort. I know Keith Baker mentioned that as part of his comments. It's great to have the opportunity to have worked on this project over the past several years, being a Rondo descendant and former resident myself, growing up in this community. But it's really centered, or actually a collaborative effort amongst several different companies that had the opportunity to work with Reconnect Rondo as the technical experts on this project. And one thing you're going to hear us say, if you don't recall already hearing Keith say it, it's grounded in community. And we simply work at the pleasure and the opportunity as practitioners to put it through our lens, what community provides us as input and the desire for their future. So you'll see on subsequent slides that this is truly by community, with community, and for community, with us simply serving as the vessels or tools or crayons in the crayon box from which to paint the vision in the future that community desires for themselves. With that being said, the Restorative Neighborhood Area Plan is a development of concepts. We see it as a development of concepts and a systems framework that really emphasizes the community ownership, history, and cultural strengths, all really along with the 21st century innovations and critical assets of the Rondo community and the surrounding area. Because one thing you're going to hear us talk about here shortly is while we speak a lot about a land bridge and an opportunity to knit the neighborhood and the fabric of the community together again, it's about the surrounding area as well and the holistic aspect of it and a comprehensive review of the Rondo community. As shown here on the screen, the plan focuses on 6 interconnected areas that we developed the plan around, that being transportation and mobility, parks and open space, economic and housing opportunities serving as another 2, environmental and resilience considerations, as well as, again, that history, culture, and arts aspect that the Rondo community has as such a rich foundation from which to build upon. This is, again, a community-centered approach that the plan aims to restore the neighborhood's cultural heritage and expand those economic opportunity, improving housing options, enhancing transportation and mobility, and creating really thriving public spaces throughout the Rondo community. Next slide there, Lance. So the document that we've been talking about and that we've delivered to Reconnect Rondo is really a document that preserves the community's unique character, supports investment and emphasis around an African American cultural enterprise district, really promotes the desired change that community shared with us as part of the engagement process, looking to enhance livability. And it hopes to serve as a guide that focuses on those key elements I mentioned, surrounding with ultimately recommendations and planning concepts for implementation over the course of the next 25 years. This is a long-range plan. This isn't something that's necessarily going to happen tomorrow or in the next couple of years, but it is something that has a short, mid to long-term implementation strategy outline. Thanks, Lance. Yeah, you'll catch that pause. Appreciate it. So, Keith commented and shared briefly the two other significant planning activities that took place as part of this. And we really see this in coordination with Reconnect Rondo and our stakeholders or agency partners and community representatives as an interlocking family of plans where the Restorative Neighborhood Area Plan works together with anti-displacement and community investment strategies, as previously discussed, and the restorative development modeling principles or vision that was developed early on in the process. You can kind of see this circular loop where the 3 kind of work in tandem with one another. Next slide, I did mention that while it is grounded and the land bridge serves as a catalyst for consideration, the planning process that unfolded over the past several years is really centered around an area. This is the Rondo Community Neighborhood Area Plan, the University Avenue to the north, Selby Avenue to the south. We did extend our limits to Hamlin on the west, and on the eastern portion, Marion to Western Avenue as well, with a little jog in there for certain considerations regarding land uses that are currently in place. So again, all with the land bridge as our center focal point as part of the process as well. So the key part of this is that, and we mentioned this on my opening comments, and Keith did too, and I'm going to emphasize it again. I tend to think of things in 3s. Keith does his in 4s. We've talked about that strikingly enough over the years, but for repetition's sake, again, was a community participation and engagement process that really looked to our elders and descendants of the Rondo community, along with St. Paul residents in the surrounding area, that created this plan by sharing their ideas and stories and aspirations for their future. While I hail from the community, I currently don't live in the community. I understand that. I have, ancestral heritage that did grow up in this community, my father having moved here in the 1950s and being displaced by the freeway just the same, and many others that I know within my family. It still comes down to those folks that are either descendants of the area or currently living in this area too. And Keith mentioned that with some of his earlier comments too, understanding that there's a lot of rich historical and existing heritage in this particular community. The community engagement process has been ongoing. Both before I was involved in working on the neighborhood area plan with all the great work that Keith had an opportunity to do as he came into the organization together with Mr. Anderson and others, Mr. Smaller and others that have been working to revitalize and uplift the Rondo community in various ways. But throughout our process, there was innumerable interviews, meetings, events, survey activities, pop-up activities, meeting people where they're at to understand what their future vision for the community is, as well as roundtable discussions with the Reconnect Roundtable folks as well. And the next three slides that I'm just going to go use to emphasize this point even further is just once again, just sharing out that it's a community-led process. We say that it is by community. Community are the ones that shared their information. Again, we are the practitioners with technical expertise in certain areas regarding transportation, engineering, planning, community planning, housing, economics, etc. But wanting to make sure that it was community, we may guide them with certain questions that get us to planning outcomes, but it is community that truly provides the input that deliver those outcomes. So by community, with all sorts of activities at Selby Jazz Fest and otherwise, our current events, as well as our dinner conversations that were had throughout the planning process too. And there's a significant portion of these activities whereby we implemented interactive engagement activities as well, gathering information. Then we would process through that information that Lance is going to present here in a moment through our practitioner's lens, present that back to community, receive additional feedback and input on that information, and refine, retool before we brought it back to them once again to understand, have we hit the mark? Are we missing something here? Is this truly what you told us? This is what I heard. Is this truly what you said or intended? And then just working through that iterative process to arrive upon a plan that hopefully sets that vision for the next 25 years, as well as an implementation plan for ensuring that this is not a plan that sits on the shelf and is something that can be moved forward. With that said, we're going to jump into some of the technical details associated with it. Again, note down your comments, questions, or otherwise. I'm going to turn it over to Lance Bernard here, who's been working on the project with me as well for the past couple of years and has an opportunity to present the technical components.
Yeah, well, afternoon. Hopefully everybody's well. Thanks for letting us be part of this today to give you some more information on the work we've been doing. And I'll be the third person now to continue to reinforce that this really has been truly a community-led process. And so as we really kind of worked through this effort and kind of worked through our process to look at things from a technical standpoint and a professional standpoint, we were really, truly, genuinely out there in the community, truly listening and understanding what the current needs and issues are. And I think that really laid a solid framework and foundation for us to move forward in this effort. So as we think about doing this type of work and starting at the very beginning and laying out those existing conditions, there's a lot of data out there that we can collect and assess from demographic data, market condition data, traffic data, and so forth. But really leveraging what we're hearing from the community provided us that framework to understand today's existing conditions. And so a fair amount of work on that was done up front that really then helped us kind of launch into really then what are the visions and goals for the community and how do we best reflect what the community wants to see implemented over time. And we'll talk a little bit about these kind of various elements here that helped us then lead into establishing some community characteristics of really articulating those desired outcomes. And how does that really feed into the concepts and things that we can jointly work on together over time? And so this process is something we'll touch on here in a number of slides here. But what we were focused on early is back to those existing conditions and really better understanding what's going on from those 6 plan elements that Craig touched on. What's happening from a transportation perspective, from the spaces that we gather in and recreate in and socialize in, the housing, commercial components to the community, the environmental and resiliency aspects of things that are happening, and more importantly, continuing to reflect on the past history, the cultural and the arts of the community, and how do we continue to fold that into the future vision of the Rondo community. So the neighborhood plan does, I think, a fantastic job of not only blending together the technical data to understand those existing conditions, but really truly leveraging the community input on the issues and needs as part of that documentation of existing conditions. And as planners, we like to use that. We love to use that information to then really help launch us into some bigger vision and goal setting activities. And so this was a very critical part early on in the engagement process where we were really truly listening to the community to try to establish those high-level vision statements and the goals that we want to work on collectively as a community. And so part of that activities that we had early on was really taking what we heard early on and doing our best to document what those visions and goals are, but then really coming back and reporting back to say, does this truly reflect what we're hearing? And so the top graph here was really the community responding to those draft vision and goal statements and saying, you know what, you're really close on this one, but some more work needs to be done. Or you were really spot on, and let's keep moving forward with those vision and goals. So that gave us an opportunity to continue to kind of listen and hear from the community and refine those vision and goal statements to then, skipping forward here, to then be able to reach some general kind of consensus amongst the community that we really do have some vision and goal statements that make sense that we can continue to work with. So that's what that bottom graph here shows, is just us meeting that alignment with what we were hearing from the community, feeling that people were fairly comfortable and with those vision and goal statements. And that's important for us to then really make sure we have a path forward of what we're really working towards. And as we were going through a lot of those exercises of understanding the vision and goals, there was a lot of kind of key words and things that we were hearing from the community, big ideas, big aspirations of things that we want to accomplish over time. And that really led us into kind of getting a little bit more in refinement and detail of what those goals mean to the community. And that is where we could get to some more direct community characteristics, that these are the tangible things we want to see happen, the things we want to feel and touch in our community, to really adhere to that bigger restorative development model that Keith was talking about. So that was really kind of an exciting exercise at one of the community events, is to really get into what these words mean to the community, because we were hearing a lot of people use words like vibrant and celebration and sustainability. Well, what do those really mean? Because words can have a lot of different meanings to different people. So that helped us kind of get to that, again, another layer of really kind of refining of what we want to accomplish over time. And those community characteristics really then launched us into some more of the detailed kind of aspects of the plan, getting into really then talking through the concepts and the big ideas around those 6 plan elements, back to transportation, housing, economic development, parks, resiliency, and health, arts, and culture. And so as we looked at those key community characteristics, they launched us into those big ideas. And so the neighborhood area plan really documents pretty much everything we were hearing from the community of things that we'd like to accomplish. We really want a cornerstone of those big ideas around the African American Cultural Enterprise District, but we also want to see things happen on the edges of that land bridge. We'd love to see more community nodes for celebration, for gatherings, open space, commercial opportunities, opportunities for people to live their whole life in the community. So making sure we have the right types of housing and services in place to keep us in the community and contribute to a higher quality of life as we age in place. So these concepts cover a whole broad spectrum of big ideas across those 6 plan elements. We could certainly sit here all day and kind of nerd out over each one of these, but hopefully this list gives you a little bit of a flavor of the things that we were hearing from the community. So that's where the neighborhood plan really starts to document how all of those connect with one another. So from just kind of a planning level aspect, it's easy to digest these if we put them in those 6 buckets, but truly they do interconnect with each other. That there's always going to be overlap in the decisions we make and in housing, transportation, parks, and open space. They all have to work cohesively and holistically together. So that really launched us into trying to articulate that through some larger system frameworks. And what are the things that we need to do to implement these big ideas in these concepts? What are the policies that we need to have in place for the city to help us implement these? What are the physical capital improvements we need to accomplish? What are the joint partnerships that we need to forge and continue to foster? So back to that 4P kind of model that Keith touched on, making sure we have public, private, the people of the community as part of those larger decisions. And so as we looked at those larger system frameworks, we wanted to continue to keep this at a fairly kind of broad brush level to understand that things are going to change over time, and we want to have enough flexibility to allow change to happen within the restorative development model, but then really reflecting back on the vision, goals, and community characteristics to help guide those bigger decisions. So as we think about where change could happen, where we would want to encourage different types of housing or different job centers, or where that could happen, we've laid out that general framework of providing some guidance and where some of those opportunities may happen. So this was intentionally done at a high level because we want to, again, provide that flexibility to let the community weigh in on those changes and not be very direct and specific of where things should happen, but at least provide that high-level framework of some guidance for those community decisions that will happen over time. We looked at that as well from a transportation perspective. What roadways make sense to continue to encourage more multimodal uses? Where do we want to create some pedestrian plazas, a larger greenway network that gives people a little bit more of that natural green space to navigate through the community? So this framework really lays out that, again, foundation of where some of those opportunities may lie. And this is important to have in place as we think about those that will be looking at improving roads in the future, whether that's at the city or state or county level, that as those investments or changes happen, this is really what the community wants to see happen along the roadway system, and where we really would like to see some things thought about differently as we make those investments to the transportation system. And then as we go further down in those elements, back to parks and open space, there's a fair amount of kind of attention spent to just where we can invest in the gathering places and places where we can recreate and celebrate, where we can find opportunities to provide more green space to continue to enhance the quality of the neighborhood. So more guidance and direction within the neighborhood plan of where some of those investments can happen and how the community can continue to encourage and support some of those changes over time. But one of the bigger things we worked on from a system framework standpoint is then really trying to think about how do we kind of program the space and what we want to see happen on the land bridge. And that certainly has a lot of ideas and a lot of concepts and aspirations by the community. And so there's more work to be done to think about how we program what is on the land bridge and on the edges of the land bridge. But we really leaned heavily into what we were hearing from the community characteristics and some of the concepts that were envisioned by the community to get to some of those ideas to just begin to start to visualize how that might come together. And so through those kind of engagement activities and listening to the community, we heard a lot about just trying to create more natural open spaces to celebrate, art installations, housing along the edges, commercial job opportunities, and so forth. So we wanted to start that conversation by giving people something to lean into and to look at and to keep the juices going as you think about the possibilities on the land bridge. So this visual representation hopefully does that, gives people an opportunity to continue to explore what the options are and and this will certainly take multiple iterations of what people want to see happen. So, overall within the neighborhood plan, it's a lot about articulating what we're hearing from the community, those characteristics, the big ideas, the concepts that we want to work towards. And as Craig mentioned, this is a long range plan. A lot of this stuff will take time, but there are certainly some small things that can start to happen now, and a lot of good things that are happening now that we can continue to build on and leverage that momentum as we work towards these concepts and ideas moving forward. So as part of this, we have to lay out a little bit of that guidance and that framework of how do we continue to move forward and implement the big ideas from the community. And this is important to do because there are other, partners at play that can help push this forward. And so we also were looking at developing a neighborhood plan that the city of St. Paul can utilize as well as they think about the changes that the community wants. There are a number of neighborhood plans throughout the city of St. Paul. So this was also somewhat similar in nature, but again, very community-led and a much more different process than how some of those other neighborhood plans may have unfolded over time. So we're really trying to lay out how we identify those priorities, those kind of short-term actions that can happen to those bigger illustrative vision ideas, and identifying the roles and responsibilities of moving forward. So there's a lot of good kind of information in there for not only the community, but the expectations from our decision makers on how to continue to move this forward. So really laying out those standards, those improvements, and those partnerships that can help implement the concepts and big ideas. So certainly a lot of kind of verbiage here on the screen, but it just kind of gives you a snapshot of some of the policies that we're trying to organize by those plan elements and what the expectations are moving forward to reach those desired outcomes. And then, leaning into a lot of the restorative development work that has been done really speaks a lot to just making sure we monitor our successes and how we track things to make sure we're achieving what we're setting out to do. And so there is some guidance and direction on how we can do that. How we monitor the benefits of the decisions that are being made to truly make sure we're achieving the desired outcomes of the community. So that's a lot to probably unpack, a lot to think about. I think this is really maybe more of a chance here to just kind of reflect and recap on where we've been, where the community's been, and helping guide us through this planning process. We've learned a lot. There's a lot of things that we've reflected on and continue to reflect on as we think about the implementation of the neighborhood plan. So maybe this might be a great opportunity for Craig, Keith, other RCR staff to just maybe share your general takeaways and thoughts on the overall process and where we are, and then we can have a little bit more discussion.
Yeah, Keith, I would invite you back to the virtual podium if you're up for it too. From RCR's perspective and kind of based on your reflection and opportunity to have been going through the Restorative Neighborhood Area Plan over the past several months and thinking about how to move it forward. What are your key takeaways with respect to where RCR sees the next phases of either implementation or advancement of the documentation?
Yeah, thanks, Craig, and thanks, Lance, for kind of laying this out. A lot of layers to this, as you all know and have discovered. Oftentimes a lot of folks aren't able to see all of the coordination and communication that is required. Keep in mind that for those that are listening and watching, we've got 5 levels of things that are considerations for us. And when I talk about spheres of influence or spheres of relationships, it's important because it really is about elders and residents, right? It is about the nonprofit ecosystem, right? It is about how the jurisdictions function. It is about our state policies, right? Our city and local government policies. It's about how we're aligning things given kind of federal priorities as well. Certainly, there's a lot of change in the wind, but we need to keep very steady moving this project forward. I'll also just indicate too that I think for our entire technical team and for those that don't see all that have been involved, we've got more than 10 different roles and responsibilities that are trying to move this thing forward. And I know we've touched on the restorative development, we've touched on certainly the neighborhood area plan, but also we're preparing to kind of launch the NEPA process. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the NEPA process, while MnDOT is at its process, we've taken on the responsibility for our own analysis, and at some point it will converge. Let me also just point out a couple of things in terms of next possible steps that we have in front of us. What we envision, when it's all said and done, is the final review and adoption by our board of the neighborhood area plan. We still have a little bit of city input, but what's important to recognize is that this is tied to the comprehensive plan for the city of St. Paul. This is tied to the economic competitiveness plan for the county. This is tied to policies that are tied also to state movement and policies, county movement and policies. So we've really done a good job of looking at the aspirations or the articulation of not only policies and strategies from these jurisdictions, but also how it kind of blends and really helps us and this opportunity be the actualizers of the policy. So once we get a chance to go through that review, then the next thing is that we will have an opportunity to put this plan before the Planning Commission. And then once before the Planning Commission, what ends up happening is it'll go to the City Council. And then from the City Council, it's our hope and our expectation, given all the work we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, adopts this into the comprehensive plan for the city. And then it will be pushed forward to Met Council for their review and inclusion and amendment into the city's comprehensive plan. And part of the balance and the challenge has been is what is restorative development? And I mentioned that much earlier. And how does restorative development actually tie into the comprehensive plan or some of the policies and strategies that are important for us to be mindful of? The one other thing that I think is important too, and I think TC2 has done such a great job in this very complicated setting of standards and guidelines, because it is complicated. And I think they've been tested in more ways imaginable in their process, but I think our entire team has. It's important to recognize our next phase also is we've tried to stay away from defining the built environment, because that is our next phase. Go through the process, get it adopted, but work with community now, say, okay, what should be placed where and what might be the timing? And so we're excited to have what we call an artist advisory team made up of Tacumba Akins, Robin Robinson, and Seitu Jones, who will lead that discussion around the built environment, the expression of the built environment, the location of art and culture and celebration in a very fundamental way. Then we can begin to define a bit more about that built environment, and that's what we hope to be doing over the next 12 to 18 months. So I'm excited about where we are right now. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Craig and Lance, but I think we have something that's modeling something very new and very unique. It's a bold proposition, but I do believe that knowing the city, the county, Met Council, and the Department of Transportation, they're also learning through this process as well, because it's changing really how we approach and who leads the approach of how things get developed.
Perfect. Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for that.